In December 2007, doctors in Detroit looked at the toxicology report and said the amount of methadone in Eminem's body was equivalent to nearly 4 bags of heroin. Just a few years earlier, the rapper had sold more than 70 million records and won an Academy Award for Lose Yourself. Now, he was lying in an emergency room, close to dying from a prescription drug overdose. The man who had dominated the Billboard charts and stood on Hollywood's biggest stage was suddenly fighting to stay alive. What happened between those two moments? Just 4 years before that hospital night, Eminem had reached a place no rapper had ever reached before. In March 2003, the song Lose Yourself from the film 8 Mile won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It was the first time in history that a hip-hop track had taken home an Oscar. Hollywood had officially opened its doors to a genre that had spent decades fighting for legitimacy. By that point, Eminem was already dominating the music industry. His 2000 album, the Marshall Mathers LP, had sold 1.7 million copies in its first week in the United States alone, setting a record that no solo rapper had ever achieved. 2 years later, The Eminem Show became the best-selling album in the world in 2002. Everywhere he went, the Slim Shady persona exploded across television, radio, and magazines. Millions of fans memorized his lyrics. Critics argued about his words. Politicians condemned him, and yet the numbers kept growing. By the early 2000s, Eminem had become more than a rapper. He was one of the most recognizable entertainers on the planet. But the strange part of the story is this. While the world was watching his rise, the Grammys, the Platinum Records, the Oscar, something else was quietly happening behind the scenes. The higher Eminem climbed, the more unstable his life was becoming. And eventually, that instability would almost kill him. Marshall Bruce Mathers III was born on October 17, 1972, in St. Joseph, Missouri. His mother, Debbie Mathers, was only 18 when he was born. His father, Marshall Bruce Mathers Jr., left the family shortly after and never returned. From the beginning, Marshall grew up in a world defined by instability. It was just him and his mother, moving constantly between Missouri and Michigan, often living in small apartments, temporary housing, or wherever they could afford at the moment. Some years they moved so frequently that Marshall had to change schools several times within a single year. Every move meant starting over. Try to fit into new classrooms, new neighborhoods, and new groups of kids who already knew each other. Eventually they settled in Detroit, Michigan, near the area around 8 Mile Road. At the time, Detroit was going through one of the hardest periods in its history. Factories were shutting down, unemployment was rising, and many neighborhoods were struggling with poverty and crime. For a child already dealing with family instability, the environment added even more pressure. Marshall also stood out for another reason. In many of the schools he attended, he was one of the very few white students in predominantly black neighborhoods. That difference often made him an easy target. Bullying became a regular part of his daily life. Classmates mocked him, pushed him around, and sometimes attacked him physically. One incident changed him permanently. When Marshall was 9 years old, a boy named D'Angelo Bailey assaulted him in a school bathroom. The beating was so severe that Marshall suffered a serious head injury and had to be hospitalized for several days. According to reports at the time, he even slipped into a brief coma. The attack left deep psychological scars. After that moment, school felt less like a place of learning and more like a place he had to survive. He became quieter, more withdrawn, and spent more time escaping into his own imagination. It was during this period that Marshall discovered the thing that would slowly change everything. Hip-hop. In the early 1980s, artists like Run DMC, LL Cool J, and the Beastie Boys were transforming rap into a powerful cultural movement. When Marshall first heard the rhythm, the wordplay, and the attitude of hip-hop, it felt different from anything he had ever experienced. The music gave him a way to process anger, frustration, and confusion. He began memorizing lyrics, studying rhyme patterns, and writing his own verses in school notebooks. By the time he was 14, Marshall had started performing rap verses with friends around Detroit. One of his early collaborators was a friend named Mike Ruby. Together, they began sneaking into local clubs to watch rap battles. Those underground battle rap scenes became Marshall's real education. Detroit's rap battles were brutal. Rappers attacked each other with fast insults, aggressive humor, and complex wordplay. If someone hesitated for even a moment, the crowd would turn on them instantly. Marshall quickly learned that survival in that environment required speed, creativity, and confidence. But there was still one obstacle that followed him everywhere. In the world of hip-hop during the late 1980s and early 1990s, a white rapper was often treated as an outsider. Many people assumed he would fail before he even started. Some competitors refused to take him seriously. Instead of avoiding the issue, Marshall turned it into a weapon. He mocked himself before anyone else could. He rapped openly about living in a trailer park, about growing up poor, and about the chaos in his family life. Those details gave his lyrics an honesty that many listeners recognized immediately. While his reputation slowly grew in Detroit's underground rap circles, his academic life continued to collapse. School had never felt like a place where he belonged. The constant bullying, frequent moves, and lack of stability made it difficult to focus. Marshall ended up repeating ninth grade 3 different times. At 17 years old, he finally dropped out of high school completely. From that moment on, survival became the priority. Marshall worked a series of low-paying jobs just to help pay bills. He spent time working as a cook, washing dishes in restaurants, and taking whatever temporary work he could find. The money was never enough, and life often felt like a constant struggle. But even during those exhausting years, one thing never changed. Every night after work, he returned home and continued writing lyrics. It was during these years that Marshall adopted the stage name Eminem, representing the initials of Marshall Mathers. Over time, the spelling evolved into something slightly different. Eminem. At the time, it was just a name circulating in Detroit's underground rap scene. No record deals, no fame, no Hollywood. Just a young man with a notebook full of rhymes, standing in crowded clubs, try to prove that he deserved a place in a culture that many believed would never accept him. What nobody knew then was that those small battles in Detroit were quietly shaping the voice of a rapper who would eventually change the entire hip-hop industry. By the early 1990s, Marshall Mathers had already decided that rap was not just a hobby. It was the only path he believed he had. Detroit's underground hip-hop scene became his daily environment. Night after night, he showed up at small clubs, community venues, and crowded basements where battle rap events were held. These places were loud, competitive, and often unforgiving. But for Marshall, they were the only spaces where he felt a sense of direction. During this time, he began performing more seriously under the name Eminem. The name was still unfamiliar outside Detroit, but inside the local scene, it slowly started to carry weight. Eminem became known for his ability to improvise complex rhyme patterns and deliver insults faster than most opponents could respond. His performances were aggressive, sometimes shocking, and always technically sharp. One of the groups that helped shape his early years was a Detroit collective called Soul Intent. The group included Eminem and several local rappers who were also trying to break into the industry. Together they recorded demo tracks and performed at small shows. These early recordings were rough and low budget, but they allowed Eminem to experiment with style and delivery. Still, the larger music industry showed little interest. In the mid-1990s, Eminem recorded his first full-length album titled Infinite, released in 1996. The album reflected the style of East Coast hip-hop that dominated the era. His delivery was more controlled and traditional, influenced by artists like Nas and AZ. While the project showed potential, it failed commercially. Very few copies sold, and the album barely made an impact outside Detroit. For Eminem, the failure was devastating. At the time, his personal life was already fragile. He was living with his longtime partner Kim Scott, and the couple had a young daughter, Haley Jade. Money was constantly tight. Some days he worked long shifts washing dishes or cooking in restaurants just to cover basic expenses. There were periods when he and Kim were forced to move between friends' houses because they could not afford stable housing. The pressure began to build. Eminem later described this period as one of the lowest points of his life. The dream of becoming a rapper seemed to be collapsing just as his responsibilities were increasing. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of quitting, Eminem began to reinvent himself creatively. Out of that frustration came a new character, a darker, more chaotic version of his personality. The name of that character was Slim Shady. Slim Shady was different from the rapper audiences had heard on Infinite. The character was sarcastic, violent, unpredictable, and often offensive. Through Slim Shady, Eminem allowed himself to say things that no traditional rap persona would dare to say. The character exaggerated his anger, his humor, and his social frustration. It also gave him a new level of creative freedom. In 1997, Eminem recorded the Slim Shady EP, a short project that introduced this new persona. The EP immediately stood out in Detroit's underground rap world. The rhymes were faster, darker, and far more provocative than anything he had done before. That same year, Eminem traveled to Los Angeles to compete in the Rap Olympics, a major underground battle rap competition. He did not win the tournament, but his performance caught the attention of several people connected to the music industry. One of those people worked for Interscope Records. A copy of Eminem's demo eventually reached Dr. Dre, one of the most powerful producers in hip-hop history. At the time, Dr. Dre had already built legendary success through NWA in his solo career, and he was known for discovering artists with unique potential. When Dr. Dre listened to Eminem's demo, he reportedly reacted almost immediately. According to several accounts, he simply said, "Find him, now!" In 1998, Eminem flew to Los Angeles to meet Dr. Dre in person. The meeting would become one of the most important moments in modern hip-hop history. Dre was impressed not only by Eminem's technical skill, but also by the originality of the Slim Shady character. Soon after, Eminem signed a contract with Aftermath Entertainment, Dr. Dre's label under Interscope Records. For the first time, Eminem had access to professional studios, major production, and a powerful mentor who believed in his potential. The collaboration moved quickly. Dre began producing Eminem's next album, helping shape the sound that would introduce him to a global audience. In early 1999, the Slim Shady LP was released. The album immediately sparked controversy. The lyrics were dark, shocking, and filled with black humor. Critics debated whether Eminem was a genius storyteller or an irresponsible provocateur. But regardless of the arguments, the impact was undeniable. The album sold millions of copies and earned Eminem his first Grammy Award for Best Rap Album. In just a few months, a rapper who had once been washing dishes in Detroit restaurants became one of the most talked about artists in the world. But the real explosion of fame had not even started yet. If the Slim Shady LP introduced Eminem to the world, the next album turned him into a global phenomenon. In May 2000, Eminem released the Marshall Mathers LP. Within its first week, the album sold 1.76 million copies in the United States, setting the record for the fastest-selling solo album in American music history at the time. The number shocked the entire industry. Hip-hop had produced many successful artists before, but nothing on this scale. Songs like The Real Slim Shady, The Way I Am, and Stan spread across radio, television, and early internet culture almost instantly. Fans were fascinated by his rapid-fire delivery and brutally honest storytelling. Critics, meanwhile, argued fiercely about his lyrics. Some accused him of promoting violence or offensive humor. Others defended him as one of the most technically skilled rappers ever recorded. The controversy only made the numbers grow larger. By the early 2000s, Eminem had become one of the most recognizable musicians in the world. His image, bleached hair, white t-shirts, intense stare, appeared on magazine covers, television interviews, and international tour posters. Every new release became an event. 2 years later, he pushed the momentum even further. In 2002, Eminem released The Eminem Show. The album debuted at #1 and went on to become the best-selling album in the world that year, moving more than 12 million copies globally. Tracks like Without Me, Cleaning Out My Closet, and Sing for the Moment dominated music, television, and radio stations across multiple continents. But Eminem's influence was no longer limited to music. That same year, he starred in the film 8 Mile, a semi-autobiographical drama inspired by his life growing up in Detroit. The movie told the story of a young battle rapper trying to escape poverty through music. While the character's name was different, many of the struggles mirrored Eminem's real experiences. The film became a major box office success and introduced Eminem's story to an even wider audience. At the center of the movie was a song he wrote during production, Lose Yourself. The track captured the tension of a single opportunity that could change a life forever. Its opening piano notes and urgent lyrics quickly turned it into one of the most recognizable songs in modern hip-hop. In March 2003, the song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It was the first time a hip-hop track had ever won an Oscar. The moment represented something bigger than just one artist. It signaled that hip-hop had officially crossed into Hollywood's most prestigious stage. Ironically, Eminem did not attend the ceremony. He later said he never believed a rap song would actually win, so he stayed home. By that point, the numbers surrounding his career were almost impossible to ignore. Millions of records sold, awards across multiple countries, stadium tours packed with fans shouting every word of his lyrics. Eminem had reached a level of fame that few artists ever experience. But behind the scenes, the cost of that success was beginning to show. Fame created constant pressure. Cameras followed him everywhere. Every lyric was analyzed. Every personal relationship became a headline. Lawsuits, criticism, and media attention began piling up around him. And while the public saw a rapper standing at the top of the world, platinum records, Grammys, and an Oscar, Eminem's personal life was becoming increasingly unstable. The same energy that had driven his rise was slowly turning into something far more dangerous. By the mid-2000s, Eminem had reached a level of fame that very few musicians ever experience. He had broken sales records, won multiple Grammy Awards, and stood on Hollywood's biggest stage with an Oscar connected to his name. To the public, his career looked unstoppable. But behind the scenes, the pressure that came with that success was slowly building into something dangerous. Life at the top did not look the way people imagined. Eminem's schedule during those years was relentless. Recording sessions, international tours, interviews, television appearances, music videos, and business meetings filled almost every hour of his time. Privacy became nearly impossible. Wherever he went, crowds gathered, cameras appeared, and every movement turned into a headline. Fame brought money and recognition, but it also created isolation. The bigger Eminem became, the harder it was for him to live like a normal person. To deal with the stress and the constant insomnia, he began using prescription medication. At first, the pills seemed harmless. Doctors prescribed medications like Vicodin to manage physical pain and Valium to reduce anxiety. When sleep became difficult, he started using Ambien. In the beginning, the drug simply helped him relax after exhausting days. But over time, the pattern changed. Instead of using medication occasionally, Eminem began depending on it. The pills became part of his daily routine. When one prescription stopped working, another one replaced it. Soon the list included multiple substances: Vicodin, Valium, Ambien, and eventually methadone, a powerful opioid sometimes used to treat heroin addiction. What began as a coping mechanism slowly turned into a dependency. While his public image remained strong, his personal life was becoming increasingly chaotic. His relationship with Kim Scott, his longtime partner and the mother of his daughter Haley, had always been turbulent. The couple married, divorced, reunited, and separated again over the years. Their conflicts frequently spilled into the media and sometimes even into his music. The emotional strain added to the pressure he was already carrying. At the same time, Eminem's inner circle was changing. Many of the friends who had supported him in Detroit were now part of his professional world. One of the most important among them was Deshaun Holton, known to fans as Proof. Proof was not just another rapper. He had been one of Eminem's closest friends since their early days in Detroit's battle rap scene. Proof was the person who had encouraged Eminem to enter rap competitions and helped him build confidence when nobody else believed he belonged. Proof was also a member of D12, the rap group Eminem formed with several Detroit friends. On April 11, 2006, tragedy struck. Proof was involved in a confrontation at a nightclub in Detroit. During the altercation, he was shot and killed. He was only 32 years old. For Eminem, the loss was devastating. Proof had been more than a collaborator. He had been a brother, a mentor, and one of the few people who truly understood the journey from Detroit's underground scene to global fame. After Proof's death, Eminem withdrew almost completely from public life. Friends and colleagues later described that period as one of the darkest chapters of his life. He spent long stretches isolated at home, avoiding the music industry, and rarely appearing in public. During that time, his use of prescription drugs intensified. What had once been a way to relax became a way to escape grief. Some days he took 20 pills or more, mixing different medications without thinking about the consequences. The drugs dulled the pain, but also blurred his thinking. His energy disappeared. His creativity slowed down. The sharp focus that had once defined his lyrics became harder to access. Physically, his body was also changing. His weight increased significantly, eventually reaching nearly 230 pounds, about 104 kilograms. For someone who had always been energetic on stage, the difference was noticeable. Still, the outside world did not fully understand how serious the situation had become. The turning point arrived near the end of 2007. One night, Eminem collapsed after taking a dangerous amount of methadone. He was rushed to a hospital in Detroit in critical condition. Doctors ran toxicology tests and quickly realized the severity of the overdose. According to medical staff, the level of methadone in his system was roughly equivalent to 4 bags of heroin. His organs were shutting down. His breathing was unstable. At one point, the medical team believed he might not survive. Eminem later said that if he had arrived at the hospital even a few hours later, the outcome could have been very different. The incident forced him to confront a reality he had been avoiding. Despite the awards, the record sales, and the worldwide fame, he had come dangerously close to dying alone in a hospital bed. For a moment, everything that once defined his success, the platinum albums, the tours, the media attention, felt insignificant compared to the simple fact of staying alive. The overdose became the lowest point of his life, but it also created a moment of clarity. For the first time in years, Eminem realized that if nothing changed, the story would end there. Surviving the overdose forced Eminem to confront a reality he could no longer ignore. For years, he had believed he could control everything: the fame, the pressure, the pills. But the hospital room in Detroit made it clear that control had already slipped away. If he continued the same way, the outcome was obvious. He would not survive it. The first stage of recovery was brutal. Eminem entered a period of detox and rehabilitation, a process that forced his body to adjust after years of dependence on prescription drugs. The physical symptoms were severe. Insomnia, anxiety, headaches, and constant fatigue made even simple daily routines difficult. There were moments when the temptation to relapse was overwhelming. To keep his mind occupied and his body stable, Eminem turned to something unexpected: exercise. He began running every day, sometimes for hours at a time. What started as short runs gradually became a disciplined routine. At one point, he was reportedly running up to 17 miles a day, using physical exhaustion as a way to quiet the mental noise that once drove him toward medication. Exercise became a replacement for the chemical escape he had relied on for so long. But recovery was not only physical. Eminem also needed to reconnect with the creative process that had once defined him. For years, music had been his most honest form of expression. Now he had to rediscover it without the fog of addiction. The first major project after the overdose was the album Relapse, released in 2009. The record openly reflected the themes of addiction, recovery, and psychological struggle. The lyrics were darker, more introspective, and often uncomfortable. Some listeners found the tone unsettling, but the album represented something important. Eminem was speaking honestly about what he had experienced. Still, he felt that the story was not finished. Just 1 year later, in 2010, Eminem released another album, Recovery. This project carried a different energy. While Relapse explored the darkness of addiction, Recovery focused on survival and rebuilding. The first single, Not Afraid, became an immediate anthem. In the song, Eminem addressed his past openly, acknowledging his mistakes and declaring that he was ready to move forward. The track debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, something very few rap songs had ever achieved. Another single from the album, Love the Way You Lie, featuring Rihanna, became one of the biggest songs of the decade. The track explored the destructive nature of toxic relationships and resonated with millions of listeners worldwide. It spent 7 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and sold millions of copies internationally. Suddenly, Eminem was back at the center of global music again. But this time the story felt different. The comeback was not about controversy or shock value. It was about resilience. Fans who had watched his rise during the early 2000s were now witnessing something else. A rapper who had nearly destroyed himself finding a way to rebuild his life. Behind the scenes, Eminem's daily routine remained disciplined. He continued exercising regularly, focused on staying sober, and spent long hours in the studio refining his craft. The chaos that once surrounded him slowly began to fade. For someone who had once been defined by anger and unpredictability, the new chapter of his career represented something unexpected: stability. The man who had nearly died in 2007 was now writing a completely different ending to his story. After the success of recovery, Eminem entered a new phase of his career. The difference was subtle but important. In the early 2000s, his fame had been fueled by controversy, shock value, and relentless public attention. Now, the focus slowly shifted back to the thing that had started everything in the first place: the music. In 2013, Eminem released a Marshall Mathers LP2, a sequel to the album that had once changed his career. The project debuted at number 1 in multiple countries and sold more than 700,000 copies in its first week in the United States. Songs like Rap God reminded audiences why Eminem had earned a reputation as one of the most technically skilled rappers in history. In that track alone, he delivered more than 1,500 words in just over 6 minutes, including a section where he rapped 97 words in 15 seconds, one of the fastest verses ever recorded in mainstream music. But Eminem's influence was no longer measured only by speed or chart numbers. Over the years, he had quietly built an entire ecosystem around his work. His label Shady Records, founded with manager Paul Rosenberg, helped launch the careers of several artists, including 50 Cent, who went on to become one of the best-selling rappers of the 2000s. Through the satellite radio channel Shade 45, Eminem also helped create a space where hip-hop artists could reach millions of listeners without relying on traditional radio stations. Meanwhile, his own catalog continued to grow. Albums like Revival, 2017, Kamikaze, 2018, and Music to be Murdered by 2020 demonstrated that he was still actively evolving decades after his debut. Some releases sparked debate, others divided critics, but his ability to remain relevant in a constantly changing industry became part of his legacy. By this stage of his career, the numbers surrounding Eminem were extraordinary. He had sold more than 200 million records worldwide, making him one of the best-selling artists in music history. Multiple Grammy Awards, chart records, and global tours had already secured his place among the most influential figures in hip-hop. But the legacy of Eminem went beyond statistics. For many artists who came after him, Eminem represented proof that hip-hop could cross boundaries that once seemed impossible. He demonstrated that technical skill, storytelling, and raw honesty could reach audiences far beyond traditional rap communities. More importantly, he showed that even someone who had nearly destroyed himself could rebuild a life and career. The story that once seemed destined to end in tragedy had turned into something far more complicated, a survival story that continued to evolve long after the headlines faded. The story of Eminem is built on a strange contradiction. A boy who grew up in unstable homes, bullied at school and struggling to survive in Detroit, eventually became one of the most successful musicians in modern history. He broke sales records, changed the sound of hip-hop, and stood at the center of global culture. Few artists have ever moved from underground battle rap to worldwide fame so quickly. But the same intensity that fueled that rise nearly destroyed him. Behind the awards and platinum records was a man fighting isolation, grief, and addiction. By 2007, the pressure had pushed him to a point where the difference between life and death was measured in hours. The overdose that almost ended his life became the moment that forced him to see how fragile everything had become. And yet, the story did not end there. Eminem rebuilt himself piece by piece, not with dramatic speeches or public reinventions, but through discipline, recovery, and the same obsession with writing that had carried him through his early years in Detroit. Today, his legacy is more than a collection of albums or awards. It is the story of someone who climbed to the top of the industry, fell into its darkest corners, and still managed to find a way back. Because sometimes the most remarkable part of fame is not how high someone can rise. It is whether they can survive what comes after.